All right, let's start with something interactive. So large language models don't always get it right. Here's a particularly infamous example. So what new discoveries from the James Webb Telescope can I tell my 9-year-old? And this was a question posed to one of the leading large language models. And I'm going to ask folks in the audience what's wrong with the answer. So the answer given was the James Webb Space Telescope was used to take the very first pictures of a planet outside the Earth's solar system, or exoplanets. So anyone just shout out if they know what's wrong with that answer? Yes, exactly. It wasn't the first. The first discovery of exoplanets was a decade earlier by the European Space Agency's Very Large Telescope. This is an example of what we call hallucination. Large language models are designed to give plausible answers. They don't always give accurate answers or truthful answers. They'll give plausible answers based on the underlying relationship between words that they're trained on. This particular example happened at a very unfortunate time. It was when the provider of this large language model was having a rollout and presentation, and the stock value for that company dropped over $1 billion because of it. Here's another example of large language models not always getting it right. This is also an infamous example, and it was a Berkeley scientist who asked one of the leading large language models to write a Python function if a candidate to be a scientist would be a good scientist based on two input parameters, race and gender. And the large language model responded with the function that you see here, which is if the candidate is white and the gender is male, then return true, and if either of those conditions are false, then to return false. This is an example of large language models stereotyping, or reproducing, perpetuating the biases that are encoded in the data on which they were trained. My name is Mike Diamond. I'm a principal product manager with SageMaker Clarify. And joining me today are Emily and Taryn, and they're going to be introducing themselves in just a few minutes when they come up after me. And we're going to be talking about foundation model evaluations with SageMaker Clarify, which was introduced this morning in the keynote by Swami. And we'll be talking about how it could help mitigate the risks of large language models during model selection and throughout the model customization workflow. So generative AI, by the nature that it's generative, introduces new risks for your organization. We already talked about a couple of them. We talked about hallucinations. We talked about stereotyping, which is a form of bias. But they also have other risks. They could reveal in the responses privacy information, such as personally identifiable information or copyright. They've been known to have examples of toxic or hateful or profane, for example, responses, and many others risks as bad actors get their hands on this capability. But making sure that your generative AI application is giving responsible responses is not the only risk. As we saw in the example, the first example that I showed, we also have to have risks that they're not accurate, that they're low quality. And why are these risks important? Well, unlike kind of consumer uses where you're interfacing with a chat interface and it gives you, a wrong answer, or you could it's silly, you could laugh it off. But when it's being used for business cases, then it's customers' trust and your brand reputation that are ultimately at risk. And in addition to those concerns, as we saw early last month with Biden's executive order and with the EU AI Act that was drafted earlier in the year, that there is going to be regulations that will be following guidances such as ISO 42001, which call for evaluations of large language models, not just for the providers of those models, but for the consumers of those models, especially in industries with high impacts to individuals. But evaluating large language models for risk is complicated and is time-consuming. There are hundreds of possible LLMs to choose from. Every day, in fact, there are more coming online. And you need to perform the evaluations not just up front when you're trying to select from these hundreds of models, but as the workflow here shows, as you customize that model, you're continually evaluating as part of your FM ops processes and workflows. There are academic benchmark sites that are available out there where you can go to. They will have a subset of the models you're interested in, and they require highly specialized knowledge to understand the scores of metrics that are available. Is an MMLU score of 236 good or bad? You can try to create your own evaluation capabilities by finding tools and deploying or importing them into your development environment, but that itself is very time-consuming and requires a lot of effort. We tried to run Helm, which is one of the large benchmarking sites. We tried to run Helm locally within our environment. It took over 100 large instances, and it ran for over 24 hours. But the concern that I hear most often when I talk to SageMaker customers is that ultimately the scores provided by these tools and capabilities don't relate to their specific use cases. So earlier today, I was very excited when Swami announced, and we released in preview, I should say, foundational model evaluations with Amazon SageMaker Clarify. And this capability will allow you to start evaluating any LLM anywhere for quality and responsibility in minutes. And there's two parts of that North Star vision that I want to underscore. The first is quality and responsibility being twinned together. So we intentionally wanted to build an evaluation capability where responsible AI is not a secondary step, is not an afterthought, but something you do at each stage in the ML workflow when working with large language models. And second is to evaluate any LLM anywhere. So as we talked to SageMaker customers, the feedback we got was that they didn't want their evaluation controls spread out over multiple environments where they're using the large language models. They wanted to concentrate and centralize within one place their evaluation logic and be able to use it across the different models. So that's what we're bringing to market. And the benefits are shown here on the right. We've curated open source data sets to get you started evaluating in minutes. But importantly, we've built this to work with your prompts and your data so that you're getting results that are meaningful to your use case. Not every evaluation can be done with algorithms. There are some evaluations, just as Swami talked about this morning, like brand or helpfulness, that are subjective and that you will want to have human evaluations. And I think as far as we know, we're the only evaluation solution now that's built from the ground up as a single solution that covers both algorithmic, metric-based evaluations and human evaluations. We've put a lot of effort to make rigorous science accessible and actionable, and the capabilities for evaluation are integrated within the SageMaker set of services so that you could have enterprise-level FMOps capabilities. And all of these benefits will help you as you comply with the guidances that I spoke about earlier. So a little bit on the use cases, and I touched on them, but to go a little deeper. The first use case that we're looking at is to help me select my model. And that initially when you're trying to choose the right LLM for your use case, this is a capability to help you make those decisions. And then secondly, once you've selected the model, there are many options to customize that model to make it perform better, such as prompt engineering, such as RAG, RHLF, and supervised fine-tuning. And Emily will be going into these in more detail. But you could run evaluations after each of these optimization exercises in order to see which optimizations are working best and ultimately which ones you want to take to production. And the users for this capability that we designed it for are the primary ones are the ones highlighted in pink up at the top there on the left, which is the core SageMaker users of data scientists and engineers, and also, as I mentioned, for the human annotators who will be reviewing and providing evaluation feedback. And these two groups will work complementary with the tool set. So you can use the algorithmic scores produced by the automatic evaluations to optimize the usage of your human workforce. That is, only have them review the ones that are the riskiest. and therefore getting the most use out of them. And then the feedback that the human reviewers provide will obviously be consumed, the ground truth, by the data scientists in order to optimize and improve. Secondary users that we thought of when we were building this capability are the business and product owners who will use our summary reports in order to make decisions around which version of a model to take to production. And then your second level oversight function, we have a much more detailed report that's 40+ pages. It gives you lots of information that can be used for documentation for compliance purposes. All right, I'm gonna go a little bit deeper now into the actual features and flows. So we have 3 user interface options available for you, and these are listed in order of simplest to use to more sophisticated to use, but greater control. So the first option is a UI inside of SageMaker Studio, where you can click, and within a few clicks, create an evaluation within minutes. The second option here is you can run processing jobs and have the benefit of a managed service. So with a few lines of Python code, you can get started with an evaluation. And then the version that gives you the most control is, and I'm proud to say this, we've released the FM evaluation library that's driving this on GitHub as an open source library. And you could use that library and the Python code and the examples that we provide anywhere within SageMaker. We come with tasks. So these are the 4 tasks that we've launched with, which is general text generation, summarization, Q&A, and classification. And you could pick any of these 4 tasks. The flow that I'm going through is the same, pretty much. I'll point out where there's differences between the different interface options. Then you would select human or automated evaluation, depending on which type of evaluation you want to perform. The human evaluation can only be set up in the UX, but the automated could be set up from all 3 options. If you're using the automated evaluation, you will likely get started with built-in data sets that we provide. And these data sets are configured across the evaluation dimensions here on the right that I'll talk about in a second. Or you can bring your own data set. We give you documentation, and it's an easy JSON lines format. You could follow the built-in data sets and bring your own. The algorithms that we provide, we have multiple algorithms which are organized across these dimensions. So the quality dimensions of, is this accurate? Is it robust? Is it factual? And then the responsible AI dimensions, is it stereotyping? Is it giving me toxic responses? And we will be extending these to additional dimensions shortly. And then we provide the results to you in S3. We have both summary and detailed reports, but you can have all of the underlying data and be able to configure the reports as you want. Emily, you want to come up and talk about LM evaluation use cases in SageMaker?
I do. Thank you, Mike. All right. Good evening. My name is Emily Weber. I lead our Generative AI Foundation's technical field community. And in particular, I'm here to share with you some thoughts about LLM evaluation. So let's dive in. So first, it's helpful to define what indeed an evaluation is. Those of you who are familiar with this is no surprise, but if this is new to you, we like to bring math, numbers, and statistics into the generative AI process. Of course, it's very convincing to think that what comes out of an LLM is always good every time you see it, but as Mike demonstrated, clearly that's not the case. So we need evaluation to produce scores, essentially. So we'll take a prompt, such as asking our model to create a short story about a doctor in Manhattan. We'll send the prompt to our model, and we get some type of output. In this case, the model goes straight to the male pronoun, and you with female doctors out there will know that is a biased response. That's a type of bias in particular. And what we want to do is we want some type of evaluation algorithm to calculate this, to define it in a numerical terminology so that we can bring those numbers and bring those data points into our governance workflows and into our operational workflows so that we can define this, monitor this bias, and then mitigate it. But of course, it's not just the bias that's the problem, it's also the lack of quality and the lack of accurate responses. And so generally evaluation, again, is bringing numbers back into the AI process, if you will, for large language models. Now, we know that there are many ways to customize a large language model. I suggest that they vary in terms of complexity and cost on the x-axis down there, and then, of course, accuracy. Prompt engineering is the way most of us get started when we're evaluating and customizing a large language model. This is because it's easy to get started and it's not too expensive, but the techniques grow over time, right? Most customers will move into some type of retrieval augmented process that's using a vector database to improve the performance of that LLM. This then gradually morphs into a fine-tuning process where, again, you're using your data to customize a model, and then pre-training is sort of the holy grail where you access large data sets and create your own models. And the only problem with this curve here is there's no point that says where you should start. It's not immediately obvious where we should optimize our development and deployment teams in this lifecycle. So I'm excited to say that you can use large language model evaluation to make the right choice across your entire development and deployment lifecycle. Starting on the top left, you can use LLM evaluation to find the right foundation model, to make the right choice about a foundation model. This choice can include the cost, obviously, the performance of the model, the accuracy of the model, its ability to handle the types of questions that you care about, and the bias of the model, the responsibility. So you'll start with selecting the model, and then that entire workflow we looked at, moving from prompting into retrieval augmented generation, into fine-tuning, LLM evaluation helps you know where you are in this process. It helps you establish, a firm plateau or a firm foundation to help you make the right decision about spending more time and resources as you move across this life cycle. LLM evaluation is helpful in reducing costs because if you realize that you're spending maybe too much money on a particular model, we can use LLM evaluation to see that actually a different model might help us hit similar accuracy levels while just being lower on cost. So there's a cost reduction opportunity, migration opportunities as well as you're developing applications and considering where the rest of those applications can sit. LLM evaluation will help you make that case. And then, as Mike mentioned, reinforcement learning with human feedback, and then governance and MLOps. These are additional capabilities that you can use to improve the performance of your LLMs. And all of this hinges on how good the model is and how much time we spend on getting there. And so this is why LLM evaluation is so important. Now, how does this work? So the first step in using this capability we're launching is, of course, first selecting a model. So in the managed web application, the flow that's available in SageMaker Studio, you'll start by pointing at any model in SageMaker Jumpstart or any model you have hosted in SageMaker. If you are using the Python SDK, you can point to any model hosted anywhere. So you can point to Bedrock. You can also point to an OpenAI model using our custom examples. So you'll point to your model, and then you'll configure your evaluation. This can be both a human-driven process, and you'll use a human-driven process when you're trying to define something that isn't already pre-built, like the brand of your company, your voice, how friendly you want the model to be, how creative you want the model to be. But if there's already a well-defined NLP metric in a data set, then you can just use the automated one. But if there's not already one, or if the performance isn't great, if it's maybe 80% of the way and you want to close the rest of the gap, then the human labeling is going to be a good choice. After that, you'll select the task for the foundation model. This can be open-ended generation, this can be question answering, summarization, and then text classification. So one of those 4 tasks, and then each task comes with a number of algorithms that implement basically the test for how well the model will perform. And then as Mike mentioned, we also have pre-built data sets. So standard NLP data sets that make this entire experience, again, very easy and very fast for a Python developer with not a lot of data science experience to be able to get up and running in minutes. It's really very friendly to use. So you'll set up your evaluation. And then you'll configure the processing job, actually. So it's going to run a SageMaker processing job in the back end. You'll point to an IAM execution role and set up a number of processing instances. We manage the distribution of that for you. So you can set however many instances you would like to use. You'll pick the size of that instance, actually. So as you're using larger data sets, you'll use larger instances. So you'll configure the job. The human feedback process will render directly in SageMaker Studio, actually. So it has a pre-built labeling user interface that you'll interact with. You just add your email address. Very easy to set up the human flow. And then there will be a number of models that you can set up in the human flow. And then they can add many metrics about their preferences, and you can gather aggregated human win rates and preference ranking. In any case, at the end, you'll store all of this, capture the results, and you'll receive a 40-page PDF report that's not just giving you the metrics, but also explaining what they mean. We'll show you really nice graphs and visuals that help you understand what these metrics mean for your business and for your customers so that you can make the right decision. So that, at a high level, is how to use foundation model evaluation. I'm going to move into the demo in a minute, and we'll take a look at this. But I have two pipelines to share with you, actually. So in addition to the open source FM eval library, we also have an example library of running the Python library in SageMaker pipelines. So if you're looking for a way to standardize governance and operations for foundation models, we have examples for you to easily validate and confirm performance for both single models and for multiple models. So one of the pipelines we're going to look at actually evaluates a llama 7 billion parameter model with a falcon 7 billion parameter and a fine-tuned llama, and runs all of these at the same time, and then does one evaluation step to help you determine which model you would like to do. So with that, we're going to look at the demo. All right, so here we are. I'm in US West 2 right now. You'll notice I'm using the new version of SageMaker Studio. So we just pushed out a new version of SageMaker Studio as of this morning. If you are using SageMaker Studio Classic, this UI is not going to render. So make sure you're using the new version of SageMaker Studio. And so again, this is a fully managed web application with a number of options, including, of course, RStudio and Studio Classic for the older interface. So on the left-hand side, I'm going to navigate down to the Jobs tab, and we'll see Model Evaluation. You'll also see Jumpstart. And so if I'm looking for a new model to evaluate, I'll pick Jumpstart. And then within Jumpstart, I'll just type Falcon. And so for Falcon, of course, you have a number of options in the Jumpstart model repository. I'll pick Falcon 7B. And so on the model card page, you have three options. You can fine-tune this model, you can deploy the model, and you can evaluate the model. Actually, the evaluation job can take a pre-hosted endpoint. So if you already have a SageMaker endpoint created in your account, and you just want to point to that and run a job, you're welcome to do that. If you want to create a new endpoint temporarily while the processing job runs, that's fine as well. So you have many options there. So we'll say evaluate. And then I'm going to zoom in here just a little bit to get a bit of a deeper view. So I'll say Emily test. All right. So as promised, both the human-driven evaluation and what we're calling automatic evaluation. And so the automatic evaluation really means, again, those pre-existing NLP metrics. So things like F1 score, things like accuracy, things like toxicity, every evaluation metric that uses basically math, that runs an algorithm, or that uses a pre-built data set, we put that in this automatic workflow. And then the alternative is using human-based evaluation, which will create a labeling job inside of this new SageMaker Studio experience for your teams to click through and then figure out your preferences to ultimately, again, perform your model evaluation. So we'll say automatic fine-tuning or automatic evaluation. And then we see the Falcon 7B model is already available here. If you want to pick a different one, I'll just say remove. And then I'm going to add the model here. So this is a second little interface for picking the model. So let's say we want to do Falcon. So they're available here. I'll say Falcon. And then here's the option to pick an endpoint that I've already deployed. So I'll go find my Falcon endpoint, which is right here. And I'm going to add this. So I'm pointing to my Falcon model. Now I'm going to select the task type. Again, we have 4 pre-built task types. One is text summarization, another is question answering, classification, and then open-ended generation. So I'll select open-ended generation. And then we have different dimensions inside of this task. So prompt stereotyping is a data set with 2 types of prompts, actually. One is very stereotypical, and one is less stereotypical. And then this dimension will test the model's likelihood for being more or less stereotypical. And so that's this CRO-S pairs. So again, I can use the built-in CRO-S pairs, or I can use my own data set. And then when I'm using my own data set, I just need to format the data to hit this model. All of the data formats are JSON lines. And that's the case for the human-based evaluation, the Python SDK, and the UI. Everything is in JSON lines. Some of the keys in the JSON lines are slightly different, but generally we built the backends to be very flexible across this entire stack. So I'll use a built-in data set, and I'll select the CRO-S pairs. And then toxicity. So toxicity will bring a pre-trained model. This is called the Unitary AI Toxicity Model. And it will basically run a type of binary classification to see how toxic this model will be. And then we have 2 data sets, the real toxicity prompts, and then this bold data set. And then factual knowledge. So in the factual knowledge dimension, the data set here is called a T-Rex. There are no dinosaurs in this T-Rex data set. I did check, but it's essentially questions and answers. In this data set, the answers are typically single word. So questions like, who is the president of the United States in 2018, or in which state is the city of Las Vegas located? Very sort of 1 or 2 word questions. And then, yeah, we bring that in the JSON lines format. And then for all of these, we take the prompts. And again, the prompts here are built in, or it's the prompts that you are loading. So you have both of those options. And then in this case, we are sending those prompts to the model on your behalf. So we send the prompts, we get the responses, and then we compute the metrics, and we'll give you all of the evaluation results so that you can understand how well this model is performing. So we'll say factual knowledge, use the built-in, great. And then I'm going to go find my S3 bucket, actually. See if I can find my S3 bucket. Just a second here. All right, so US West 2, and we'll set this one. Great. So I'll pass my S3 location. Great. So that is where my evaluation results will go on completion of this processing job. I will see a PDF report, I'll see a markdown file, and I'll see all of the configuration data, in addition to, of course, the input data when I'm bringing my own. And then I'll set up my processing job. So this is a smaller data set, so I'll use just one instance, and in particular the M5.2XL. If I were working with a larger data set, I would simply increase this. So you can bump this up to the M5.4, maybe the .12 if you're working with something larger. All right, great. We'll take questions at the end. And then my execution role is here. So I'll select next. I get a nice job summary, so my job details, the evaluation setup that I have, and I'll say create resource. And of course, I used the wrong S3 bucket. Oh, did I? Oh, yikes. Oh, thank you. Classic. All right. There we go. All right, great. So my job is coming online. I can also see a number of jobs that I've been running to test and confirm this. So I'll just show you some of the other jobs that I've run previously. So I ran a job to test the Falcon 40 billion parameter model. In this case, the service is creating an endpoint for me, again, using SageMaker Jumpstart, running the evaluations, and then tearing down the endpoint on completion and giving me the evaluation results. The view we're seeing here is a summary. So this is the condensed view that's telling me the number that I'm getting on prompt stereotyping, and then all of the reports about toxicity, again, using the unitary AI pre-trained model, factual knowledge, and so on. All of the metrics are scaled between 0 and 1. Most of the time, a higher number is better, except for toxicity, when, of course, a lower number is much better. So from the model summary page, I can then view evaluation results. And that's going to take me out to S3, where I'll see, again, the markdown, PDF, and then the JSON configs and outputs. I'm going to jump straight to the report. So this is, again, that 40-page detailed report that summarizes both at a high level what my job was about. So again, factual knowledge with the aggregated performance, prompt stereotyping, toxicity, the evaluation job config, and then a detailed report. And then again, I love this report because it's providing insight not just about what the result was for the metric, but what the metric means, how you can interpret it, how to consider the implications of that, and how it's commonly used. A couple nice visuals for you. And so the stack actually lets you bring what's called a knowledge category. So especially for factual knowledge, usually customers will bring data sets that have many different categories already. So one of the DIY jobs that I ran was about the SageMaker FAQs. And so I had many different categories, including about like hosting and training and endpoints. And so all of those like detailed knowledge categories you can bring into the stack, and then it'll give you a further level of analysis. So in any case, that is my report. We're going to move on. So the report is just the beginning. Again, you also have an open source Python library. This is available on GitHub. So FMEval is the name of this framework. spectacularly easy to use. We designed this to be really, really accessible so that no matter who is coming in to help you stand up your LLM development and deployment life cycles, they should really be able to evaluate a foundation model. So you'll do a general pip install. The pip install is extensive. It has a lot of the low-level frameworks and packages built in. So you do one pip install, and then again, we have many examples, including examples for Bedrock, Jumpstart, ChatGPT, custom models and Hugging Face, and then actually another mode where you can, we call it bring your own outputs. So if you want to go, interact with the model wherever you like, and then download the model results and bring them into this environment to do the evaluation, then you can do that right there. I have a version of this running, so we're going to step through this very quickly. You'll see I'm in SageMaker Studio, and the library runs locally. Actually, the library is going to run locally in a notebook, and then you can put that in a job if you want to. But when you're stepping through this just to explore it, you'll want to set up a slightly larger instance. The M5.2 is fine. I am probably running on a little bit more just to make sure this was nice. So in any case, pip install fmeval, import SageMaker. I'm going to point to, again, Llama 7B here. We'll use Jumpstart to just deploy it. And then the config should be really easy. So again, from fmeval, you'll import a data config. Call it a model runner, which is just a pointer to a model. And then the configuration for the algorithm itself. So this one is factual knowledge, and then you'll configure that. So we're going to point to, this is a local data set that's just sitting in my notebook. You can also pass an S3 path, which will then retrieve it if it has access. And then the factual knowledge data set here is, again, question and answer. It does have this OR string here. So we'll point to our model. Again, we're pointing to a Jumpstart model. And then we set up the factual knowledge evaluation, run model.evaluate. And then again, this is running locally on the notebook. Once this is finished, you'll get the evaluation outputs. And then here I can see my Llama 7B actually did quite well. So I'll point 5.9, which was surprising for a 7 billion parameter model. That was a nice find. And then you can review the results out here. You can load them into a data frame. You can store them in S3. You can also put them in a pipeline. That's what I'm going to show you next. So we have another open source repository. This is taking this new framework and putting it inside of SageMaker pipelines. So I've been playing with this all week, for the last couple of weeks, actually. It is very nice and easy to use. Works very well, and it's easy to customize. So there's a large YAML file to configure this entire pipeline, and then you can customize this YAML file to point to different models and to do slightly different things in your entire pipeline. It's really valuable, again, to build a pipeline for evaluation because it lets you evaluate new developments very quickly. So whether it's a new step in your retrieval process, whether it's a new agent you're testing, a new model, a new data set, when your evaluation stack is built as a pipeline, it makes it really easy to just run and see very quickly if you need to evaluate a new model even further. And so we're going to look at this in SageMaker Studio. So again, I'm back in SageMaker Studio. This is the classic view. I'm running this framework, and I have two pipelines. The first is evaluating a single model. So I'm going to open the execution details here. And here is my pipeline. So I deployed a Llama 2, 7 billion parameters. I ran a pre-processing step. And then I have this evaluation step that is using this library, and it's taking the output of that model, running an evaluation, and then storing the results in S3. And so actually there's an HTML file generated in S3 showing me how my model performed. So that's the single model. I can also evaluate many models. All right, and so here is my beautiful tri-model evaluation pipeline. So I'm deploying Llama 7B over here, running the same pre-processing across all three of these. Then I'm deploying Falcon 7B. Then I'm fine-tuning Llama, deploying this, and evaluating it. So it's the same evaluation stack for all three of these models. I'm going to bring them all together. I'm going to make the choice about which model to use, and then I'm going to clean everything up. And so I hope you enjoyed the demo. I'm going to hand it over to Taryn, and she's going to share with you how they think about responsible AI and model evaluation at Indeed.
Okay, we are back. Slides, yeah. Okay, we'll go ahead and skip that demo. Awesome. Hi, everybody. I'm Taryn Heilman. I am a senior data scientist on the responsible AI team at Indeed. So first, I'll tell you a little bit just about how we think about AI. At Indeed, our mission statement is we help people get jobs. And so we work really hard in our two-sided marketplace to open access to opportunities for all job seekers. And so our development of AI applications to aid this are guided by that mission above all else. And so I'm on the responsible AI team, which sits in the ESG, or Environmental, Social, and Governance organization. And in that organization in particular, we believe that talent is universal, but opportunity is not. And so we're delivering opportunities at scale on our platform, and if we don't take proper care, the biases and barriers that job seekers have been facing since, paid work became a thing, are going to be reinforced and amplified at scale, which we don't want to do. So within ESG, we spin the model a little bit to say that we want to help all people get jobs. And so we want to ensure that all job seekers are benefiting from AI. So on this slide here, you can see we have these 5 principles that we think about when we are interacting with AI. We always put the job seeker first. We center fairness and equity in all of our development work. We are continually listening and taking feedback from our customers and our users. Hiring is human is a really important one. So AI aids so many parts of the job seeking and matching process already, but both job seekers and employers both really share this belief that a human should be in the loop and that a human should be making the final decision. And then lastly, we innovate responsibly, which is why I have a job. So a little bit more about the responsible AI team in particular. We're a very small team. The CEO always describes us as small but mighty. We have scientists, we have a software engineer, we have user researchers, and we try to help all people get jobs and sort of break down some of those bias and barriers that people face and make sure that our AI products are inclusive to everyone. And we do this in a couple of different ways. So we have sort of 2 personas that we operate on. The first one is more of a blue team persona, so we do it in a collaborative way with the development teams. So we ensure that their data and labels are collected responsibly. We help them ensure they have balanced data sets, et cetera. We use inclusive, human-centered design principles at every stage of the process. And then we really focus on transparency and explainability. And so we do these things in collaboration with product teams. But we also have sort of a red team persona where we take care of some of the more regulatory functions. Hiring is a very heavily regulated field, not unlike healthcare, finance. So some of our algorithms are subject to audits under law. And so we look at those algorithms independently and perform what we call fairness audits, and we look at sort of the traditional fairness metrics for those. And so this is a complex process. Evaluating models, there's all sorts of different models. There's your traditional binary classification problem, which historically in AI ethics has received all of the research and the attention. On our platform, we do a lot of recommendation and ranking. There's also scoring that you could have a simple regression model. And so all of those different types of models need to be evaluated differently. And then you also have to consider the impact that a product has on a user. So for example, if you've ever gotten an email in your inbox that's inviting you to apply to a job, I think most of you probably have had that experience, that's generally considered a positive intervention. So we'd want to make sure that our selection rate for that, for example, might look the same across different demographic groups. I'm going to throw a non-Indeed example for a negative example. Facial recognition algorithms are often used in policing contexts. Usually if your face is getting flagged in a facial recognition algorithm, it's not great. So you want to make sure that your false positives are the same throughout groups. You don't want to have more false positives for one group than for others. But now let's talk about LLMs, because that's what everybody's here in Las Vegas to talk about, is LLMs and generative AI. This has added many new dimensions of complexity to how we think about evaluating models for fairness and for responsibility. Emily and Michael have already talked about a number of dimensions that we care about, and I'm just going to provide a little bit of color for how we think about these things at Indeed. So discrimination and toxicity are a big one. If you're generating say an AI-generated recruiter email, you don't want there to be any inappropriate language in there. You don't want any violence or hate speech, any of the really obvious stuff. But there's also more subtle things like exclusion, bias, representation harm. So you also wouldn't want that recruiter-generated email to express a preference for, say, young, energetic candidates. It's not great, right? There's some age bias there. What if you're automatically generating a job description? We would not want, let's say, a job description for a nurse to automatically put a bunch of female pronouns in there. That's a representation harm. Other things that we might care about are like factual errors and misinformation. If we're generating say a summary of a resume or a summary of why we think a candidate's a good match, are the things that the text is generating actually true? Michael showed an example. We know that they're not always true. And they may be true but not useful. And then another thing, of course, is privacy violations. We don't want any sort of training data. We will be training models on all sorts of sensitive HR data, and we would not want that to be leaked in any responses that might come out of these language models. So a little bit more about how we're thinking about using language models. One thing might be a standard sort of classification context, which is matching, right? We have job seekers, we have jobs. We want to match job seekers that are qualified for jobs, that are likely to get contacted by an employer. And we've been using language processing to do this for a decade, but LLMs actually do a really good job here. They do a better job than like traditional NLP approaches such as n-grams, because you can both fine-tune them for specific tasks, and then also they just transformers take into account much more context than traditional NLP approaches. So that's a classification approach, but we also are using it for generative reasons, such as maybe drafting job descriptions, helping out employers. We might use it to explain job seeker job matches. So you guys might see this example that we have here. This is something that a job seeker might see. This is a job that some sort of matching algorithm has determined is a good match for them. And then we're using generative AI to come up with reasons why we're telling them, okay, this is why we think you should apply to this job. In this case, you're a top candidate, so you're likely to get contacted. It matches your schedule. This employer pays well. These are all things that the language model thinks are important to explain this match. We also are thinking about chatbot use cases. So this might be something to help job seekers with their resume or with cover letters, or even just to suggest relevant jobs to them. Similarly, we might have one to help out employers. This is, of course, not a complete list of use cases. I'm sure everybody is having the situation at their company where there are 50 different generative AI projects going on, and we're the same. So we have all these complex use cases we're considering, and now I'm just going to kind of wrap it up by talking about how we can use this product to help us evaluate those models. So one of the first things we care about is the output text factual? So in the previous example, we saw an explanation on why a job might be a good fit. You might also see explanations as to why a job seeker is a good fit for the job, like skills, relevant experience. So we want to make sure that that stuff is actually true. If, for example, somebody recommended me for a job and they said, oh, well, Taryn would be great at this job because she has a lot of marketing experience, or one that actually happens to me, Taryn has all this data engineering experience. Friends, I have no data engineering experience, so that's not true. So we'd want to catch that. Similarly, maybe it comes up with something that's true, but is it useful, right? Does it point to recent relevant experience on the resume, or is it pointing to something old? And so for this, we would use the factual knowledge evaluation and summarization evaluation modules to see, are we producing factual, useful summaries of these resumes/job descriptions? You may also find that this is kind of subtle, right? Is something useful is something that you may need a human in the loop to work on. And so we would use, human annotators on the platform as well. One thing we care a ton about in responsible AI is biased language. I came up with the example earlier of we don't really want a nursing job description to use a bunch of female pronouns. We wouldn't want a truck driver or a doctor job description to use male pronouns. And so for something like that, we could use the stereotype evaluation that Emily demonstrated to look and see how stereotypical the outputs are, and hopefully mitigate and reduce some of that. Toxicity and appropriate outputs is the really obvious one. We don't want any sort of headline generating text coming out of our models. We don't want any poor language or threats, violence, et cetera. And so the toxicity detection, there's a couple of different models that you can actually choose from on FM-eval, and you can test for toxicity among a number of dimensions, and it'll actually describe, is it severe toxicity, is it hate speech, is it, violent, et cetera, and so you can actually get that classification as well. And then lastly, one thing that we measure a lot is performance disparities between groups, and so this might be if you're using something in a more traditional classification sense. You can use the classification evaluation on FM-eval for LLM classification, and then we have a demographic data store that we would then join that information with to measure the performance across groups, which is a big thing we do in responsible AI. We want to make sure that the model performs as well for men as it does for women, as well as it does for all races, all ages, et cetera. So I think we are actually a little bit over time, so I'm going to hand it back to Emily.
All right, thank you so much, Taryn. Great, so in summary, 4 resources for you. So on the left-hand side, you have a What's New blog post that explains in more detail some of the features and use cases that you've just seen. The second QR code is pointing to the GitHub repository, and so that's the repository that runs FM evaluation in SageMaker pipelines and lets you easily customize that to set up your own evaluation pipelines. The third QR code is the service documentation, so you can take another look at all of the back-end capabilities and requirements. And then the fourth one is that FM-eval GitHub repository and example notebooks for you to test anything and everything under the sun. So I'm going to leave this up here for you to get the rest of the links, and then I'd like to invite Mike and Taryn back on stage. We're going to take a couple minutes of question and answering. So I don't have any mic runners, so feel free to just raise your hand and then try and project, and then we'll repeat your question. So do I have any brave volunteers to have a question?